Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Welcome back to the Infowars Nightly News. Once again, I'm your host, Darrin McBreen, and I am looking forward to this next segment because there's no doubt in my mind that the U.S. government has been involved in drug trafficking for a very, very long time. And I've always suspected that they're also the ones responsible for introducing most of the hardcore drugs into our society to begin with. I mean, if you think about it, this is the old familiar game of divide and conquer. And what better way to control a society than having half of them walking around dazed and confused, sedated and disoriented most of the time? Not to mention that drugs are also a very good tool for blackmail, frame-ups. You know, a lot of these guys are sent to jail because of drugs. And don't forget the destruction of the family unit. And as you are about to learn from our next guest, the use of drugs has been instrumental in the social control of our society by the global elite. And we're joined now by author Potash, and he's here to talk about his groundbreaking book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us: The CIA's Murderous Targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and other activists. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks so much for having me on, Darrin.
Hey, well, back me up on this, because during the intro, I was just saying how our federal government is, well, they've been responsible for drug trafficking for a very, very long time. For one, what proof do we have of this? And does that mean that this whole war on drugs is a fraud? Say it isn't so.
Yeah, well, I talked to CIA Station Chief John Stockwell in 1990, and he confirmed to me that he was flying opium on Air America planes from Vietnam into the United States for the CIA. And he said that continued and that was called the Golden Triangle back then, that area of the world, because it was the best area of the world for growing poppies, which produce opium, which produce heroin. And in the 1980s, the most popular area in the world for growing poppy fields and opium, which produces heroin, was the Golden Crescent, and that's the area around Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Which has reemerged as the number one spot for growing the poppy fields again, right?
Exactly, yeah. And John Stockwell said that the CIA was then trafficking heroin from that area to the United States and to Europe, and he was still working with the CIA and then had friends in the agency after he left the agency that confirmed that. So that's some of the evidence, and there's much more evidence than just that. But yeah, it's there's so much evidence I show in my book that, yes, the CIA was the largest drug trafficker in the world.
All right, so we know the CIA is responsible for drug trafficking, but do you think it's more than just about the money, or is their goal and their intent to have a drugged up society?
Yes, it does seem to be about social control. And in 1991, I talked to former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who was U.S. Attorney General under President Johnson. And he said, and I asked him about drugs and the government, he says he thinks the government uses drugs to sedate and divide the masses. And I've got much more, evidence and confirmation from many other people that that's the case. And I show that, of course, in my book.
Well, I thought it was very interesting, and I haven't read the book in its entirety yet. I'm going to, because as I started reading it, I'm definitely going to finish this soon. Rob Dew, our news director, said he's finished it, and he said it's excellent. So I'm definitely going to finish it.
Thanks so much.
Now, we're talking about CIA's MK Ultra. It's no secret that they used LSD and other drugs in experiments. That's all declassified. But do you think they used LSD as a weapon against certain individuals?
Oh, yes, definitely. I
Not
give
just
a lot
experiments. I mean, they're using this as a weapon.
Oh, yes. And some of the examples of the evidence supporting that are the fact that A.E. Hotchner, who was a longtime editor for Ernest Hemingway, he wrote in his book Blown Away about the fact that MK Ultra Deputy Director Robert Lashbrook took to London loads of LSD and lots of money to give grants to a lot of different groups all around London and assigned agents to get LSD in as many musicians' hands as possible. And I argue and show the evidence of that was for promoting, for the musicians to promote acid to the masses and to hurt the minds of those musicians they thought were potential problems in terms of being political.
Well, and you also talked about how, like, the Beatles took LSD covertly, that it was given to them covertly, and also
Right.
an FBI agent gave Mick Jagger LSD for the first time. Tell us more about that.
Right. So this Robert Lashbrook came to London in 1965, and that same year, John Lennon and George Harrison were having dinner at George Harrison's dentist's apartment, and at the end of the dinner, they begged John Lennon and George Harrison and their partners testified to this in articles and mainstream news articles, that they begged him to stay for coffee. And so when they drank the coffee and were done the coffee, they said, "We got to go now. We got to see this friend's band and we're late." And they said, "No, you can't drive." The dentist said, "You can't drive because you just had LSD." And George Harrison said, "What's LSD?" And John Lennon said, "It's a drug." And John Lennon was furious that they were just dosed with LSD. Now, 2 years later, Mick Jagger was having a party, and according to A.E. Hotchner, who interviewed his girlfriend and interviewed a number of other people, Mick Jagger was the last holdout in the Rolling Stones to use acid. And he was also very anti the Vietnam War. He started going to Vietnam War protests. And an undercover FBI agent, according to London Daily newspaper, actually came to that party, gave Mick Jagger his first hit of acid, and people convinced him to try it for the first time. And then hours later, after he had been tripping, police came in and busted them.
Him and Keith Richards.
Him and Keith Richards, yeah. And they were then under legal authority's thumb and made life a lot tougher for them.
Well, and I'm also curious that you think that the CIA might have actually been involved in the murder of John Lennon. Now, we know that the FBI definitely, that he was considered a dangerous man and a threat to the establishment because, God forbid, he was out there preaching about peace. But do you think he was targeted and he could have been murdered by the CIA?
Yeah, and this comes from a legal attorney named Fenton Bressler. He was a British attorney who was a crime reporter for a daily London newspaper. And he did a 7-8 year study, investigation of Lennon's death. And he came to that conclusion that the CIA had actually developed Mark David Chapman, basically hypnotizing him and using drugs to turn him into a murderer. And now another author named Philip Strongman, who's written a number of highly popularized books on music, ended up writing a book about John Lennon himself. And he concluded that he had the same conclusion basically as Fenton Bressler, but he added that the doorman that night at Lennon's apartment was also a CIA asset, had been working as a Cuban asset for a decade. He was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis and many other operations, and he actually aided that assassination of John Lennon that night. And it was due to the fact that Lennon fit the general course of how the CIA dealt with very popular musicians. They first manipulated them to start using drugs, got them to popularize those drugs, but when then those musicians started sobering up and getting more into activism, they then had to do them in, and that's what they did to John Lennon. And I argue that's what they did to Kurt Cobain, Tupac Shakur, and Jimi Hendrix.
I understand his manager was an MI6 agent, and he supposedly admitted to killing Jimi Hendrix. What's that all about?
Yeah, well, basically, Jimi Hendrix didn't get big in the United States. He got big in England. And when he started getting very big, it was obvious, according to many British musicians, that he was an unbelievable guitar player. And so when he got, he started soaring in Britain, and under an agent, basically a guy named Mike Jeffrey, entered his life and had all kinds of connections. And I argue inserted himself as Jimi Hendrix's manager because no one else could handle his soaring fame. But Mike Jeffrey ended up admitting that he was an MI6 agent in the past, and he pretended like he left MI6, but all the evidence shows that he actually continued his work for MI6 undercover. And he proceeded, after Jimi Hendrix was already getting very big, he proceeded to start to sabotage Jimi Hendrix's career, having him fly all across the country in between gigs, and was censoring some of his music, not having him put out albums when Jimi Hendrix wanted to put out many more albums. And Jimi Hendrix couldn't take it. He tried to fire Mike Jeffrey, but Mike Jeffrey did all kinds of things to stop that. So Jimi Hendrix finally fired Mike Jeffrey, and within 48 hours, he died. And so a roadie for Jimi Hendrix ended up coming out with a book within the last few years, a guy named James Tappy Wright, who said that Mike Jeffrey actually admitted when he was drunk to having Hendrix killed. And so I show the evidence and the reasons for that being that Jimi Hendrix ended up becoming very political after Martin Luther King's assassination. And at that point, he started supporting the Black Panthers and talking about them in interviews and saying, dedicating his last album to the Black Panthers, and started forming political plans, according to his fiancée, Monica Danneman, who wrote about it in a book she came out with a year before her death. And so it showed all the evidence that, it was another case of U.S. and British intelligence, this time collaborating with U.S. intelligence to use a musician to popularize drugs. But then when they started sobering up, and all accounts had Jimi Hendrix sobering up, they then did him in when they started sobering up and getting more into activism.
Wow, very interesting. And you also mentioned the Black Panthers. A very good friend of mine, Larry Pinckney, who was a member of the original Black Panther Party. He was also a victim of COINTELPRO and a political prisoner for 10 plus years. And we actually got our hands on his FBI profile through the Freedom of Information Act, where it stated that they considered Larry Pinckney a threat because, get this, his ability to unite people of all color. So once again, that's more evidence that the establishment, they really want us divided. They don't want us united. And so how did what about the rest of the Black Panthers? How did they use drugs against them?
Well, the national founder of the Black Panther Party, was Huey Newton.
Yep.
And undercover agents got involved in his life just after he was let out of jail, and brought cocaine to him and all other drugs to him, and got him messed up on the drugs for a bit. And according to John Stockwell, they targeted him with psychological warfare for his entire life until his death in 1989. And all the evidence around his death suggests that it was a U.S. intelligence assassination. And they did the same thing to the New York Black Panther leader, Afeni Shakur. She was one of several of the Black Panther leaders in New York City. And I showed the evidence that an undercover agent entered her life when she was in a beleaguered time of her life, and kept giving her crack cocaine, and she got addicted to crack cocaine. And she had been touring college campuses nationwide, giving lectures, and it took her out of that kind of activism, and hurt her life and hurt her son's life, the rap artist Tupac Shakur.
Okay, and then let's get into Tupac in a second, but first I was curious about Kurt Cobain. What did they have, what did the establishment have against Kurt Cobain other than, 30 million albums that Nirvana sold? I mean, what on earth did they have against him?
Yeah, again, it fits the profile of take a talented musician, manipulate him to popularize drugs, and then when he starts sobering up and turning on more to activism, do him in. And that, show all the evidence that was the case with Kurt Cobain. Now, a great new documentary, like a docudrama / documentary called Soaked in Bleach, came out and presents taped witnesses, the top pathologist, saying that he's never seen a case where someone shoots up a large amount of heroin and then proceeds to shoot themselves in the head. He says this is an 80-year-old top pathologist who says it just doesn't happen. He's never seen it before, and he says there was many dubious decisions around Cobain's case, pronouncing it a suicide the same day as they found his body, for example. And many other experts say the same thing about that. They didn't develop the pictures around his death for 20 years. And experts say that the pictures could have said a lot about if someone else's hand was around the gun besides Kurt Cobain's, it would have left empty space where the blood would have splattered on the rifle. So there's just much evidence that actually Courtney Love, sadly enough, played a part in orchestrating his murder. But the evidence goes much higher than that, because the fact that a police detective who spent many hours investigating as a murder instead of a suicide, as the supervisor of the investigation told his police to do, only called a suicide. He was the first officer to die in about 8 years on the Seattle police force, and he died while investigating Cobain's death as a murder instead of a suicide. And somebody who said that Courtney Love offered him $50,000 to kill Kurt Cobain died within days of saying that on camera. And he had passed a top polygrapher's test, saying, with a 99% score, that he was telling the truth about that.
Wow. And, Joe Biggs here at work, he told me about that documentary, Soaked in Bleach, so I definitely want to check that out. And there's a lot of that information about Kurt Cobain's death in your book as well. We got a minute, 20 seconds left. Quickly, if you could talk about the laundered drug money that might have had to do with Tupac's death.
Yeah, what Tupac was helping his Black Panther extended family get Bloods and Crips gangs, first in California, then across the country, to call peace truces. Now, these were the leading drug dealers in the country, and when they all started calling peace truces and actually turning on to activism and stopping their drug dealing, including the entire Latin King gang membership, about 3,000, that took vast amounts of money out of the drug traffickers' hands and out of the money launderers' hands. And that cost them, tens of billions of dollars. And that's why one of the reasons Tupac was such a concern to U.S. intelligence, since, as we said before, the CIA were the top drug traffickers in the country.
Wow, so it sounds like the establishment is really responsible for building a lot of these guys up and then tearing them down, in the same process. Right. Check it out, guys. Here's the book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us. This should be in everyone's arsenal. If you're a truther, it belongs on your bookshelf. Check it out. And this is not a plug for Infowars, because we don't carry it, at least not yet. John, thanks for joining us. Hey, we'll have to have you on back in the near future.
That'd be great, Darrin. Thanks so much.
Break down why you're so proud of these filters.
Well, I mean, the Alexa Pure is really a culmination of all of my experience. It was posed to me as an extremely challenging project. They wanted a product that would actually operate without any electricity, so it had no pressure. You had to do it all by gravity. And they really effectively said, we need everything imaginable to be removed efficiently, way higher than 99%. And so the result was it's an extreme challenge. Worked on it for quite a long time. And basically what we've done is we've created the only filter, to my knowledge, that hits all three. It will remove effectively all the major metals, all the major non-metals such as fluoride. It will take out all known microbiological threats, including viral, bacterial, and cyst. And it will take out organic chemicals, pretty much everything, without exception. It's a very, very powerful device. I don't believe that there's anything else out there in the world that can do that, especially under gravity flow conditions. The fit and finish are fantastic. No compromise was made on the quality of the construction. So, I mean, it's really a remarkable achievement on their part, and I feel very proud, actually, to be part of the team that put that together.
What's your view overall on fluoride?
Well, okay, so we actually tested against both the fluoride ion and the fluorosilicate that you mentioned, which is the additive that people put into water under federal control. And basically, we removed both of them with equal efficiency. So we wanted to be sure that no matter how fluoride is added to the water, it can be intercepted and removed. So that's how we've dealt with that. All I can tell you is that we tested against all known fluoride chemicals that are added to water, the new ones and the old ones, and we removed them all of equal efficiency. And
it's your belief that this is the best gravity-fed filter of the design out there available to the public?
Without a doubt. I mean, most of these gravity flow filters are at best simple particulate filters. They remove dirt and debris, sediment. They're not going to be capable of intercepting a viral particle. to the degree we're talking quantitative reduction below detection. No one can touch that kind of capability.
Well, I'm impressed, and I want to thank you so much for your time today. It is the Alexa Pure Pro family of water filtration systems available, discounted exclusively at InfoWarsStore.com. I want to thank Mr. Red Hawk for allowing us to be part of the launch of this. It's on sale right now for their main unit, $177. Leading competitors that aren't even as good are more than that. And they've also got the survival spring type straw system for survival that is an absolute must-have.